So if I'm going to really enjoy a portrait in a gallery, it's got to make me feel something. If the portrait makes me laugh, then that's really something. And here's a guy on Pat's Personality Portraits that makes me laugh regularly, and a whole lot of other people around the world. I'm telling you, you know what? I have wanted to do this for a long time, Mark Cordes, because we ask for fascinating people who do fascinating things to show up. And what you do is fascinating. Test pilot, dangerous. Navigator of an Italian cruise ship, really dangerous. Stand-up comic, absolutely the most dangerous job I can think of. Do you think of it that way?
You know, I really don't. To me, it's just lack of any other skills, and and I work an hour a day. You know, so it's to me, it's not terrifying. What's terrifying to me is the idea of sitting in a cubicle for 8 hours a day. That scares the heck out of me.
Yeah, but all right. So you've been doing it for how many years?
Full time for 24 years.
Yeah.
Since I left the real world.
And you've done all the television shows, and you have a show of your own, a one-man show that we're going to be talking about in a moment. But getting back just to why you're here, I want to talk to people about what in the world ever makes somebody choose to go out on the end of the gangplank and say, oh, wait a minute, that looks like a packed audience tonight that paid a lot of money to get in, and several of them are loaded. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to make them laugh in spite of the fact that the entire front 6 rows is saying, so you think you're funny,
exactly.
Huh? How do you get past that?
You know what? I think back, and I got to be honest with you, I think back to the first couple times I did it, and I thought, and I think now, what was I thinking? Thank God I just went for it.
Where was it the first time?
Well, this is kind of funny. I was going through a divorce, which is, I think, the impetus for a lot of us. And I was selling real estate here in the Valley, and I was out with a bunch of my buddies, and we were at Baxter's Restaurant at Paradise Valley Mall.
Yes.
Next to Coco's.
Yes.
And 8 o'clock rolls around, and we're all drinking beers, and it's a Wednesday night, and all of a sudden the lights dim, and the guy comes out and puts up a little makeshift stage, and he said, it's open mic comedy night. And we all just kind of sat back and went, you know, and we watched. And when it was over, my friends called the manager over and said, you ought to have this guy, and pointed to me, you ought to have this guy go up and do that. He's funnier than those guys. And the guy called my bluff and said, okay, come back next Wednesday, you got 5 minutes. And I sobered up Thursday morning and thought, what am I going to do? Put together 5 minutes and went in there and did it. And when it was over, he said, come back next Wednesday. And I said, was I good? And he said, no, you sucked, but you sucked less than anyone I've ever seen on their first time. And somehow that was a positive.
But everybody's got a funny uncle, Mark.
Yeah.
Everybody's got somebody that's funny that the rest of the family says, oh, I can't stand it anymore. You drive me crazy. It's the funniest stuff I've ever heard. You want to get into show business.
Right, yeah. Oh, I get those guys that come up after every show, you know. Hey, all my friends tell me I'm funny. How'd you get started?
What's the worst ever audience you had?
Oh, wow. Worst, and it wasn't their fault, but I was in Vegas one night, and I went out, and I was supposed to do 18 minutes. And the first 3 minutes, I'm thinking, this is not going well. And the lighting and technical guys behind the curtain are laughing their butt off. And finally, I found out it's because the whole room had been bought out by Japanese tourists, and they didn't understand one word I was saying. And I glanced down at my watch, and I go, okay, 14 more minutes and they literally did not understand one word. They were there because between the comedians were topless entertainers that would come out.
You're getting more laughs from me now
than
you
18
did in
minutes.
18 minutes.
It was, and as I think back, it was pretty funny. But at the time, it was ridiculous.
Oh, well, imagine a Japanese stand-up guy coming here and working the improv,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
When you're writing your own material, and you do that.
Yes. Everything I do is my own.
When you're writing a piece at home, or maybe even at the last minute in the dressing room, how do you test it? You think it's funny. You've had all those years of knowing funny, but the guy in the third row doesn't think it's funny.
Well, you never do a joke that everybody thinks is hilarious. Because if you do, you're probably writing to the lowest common denominator, you know. My goal, I know what's funny. I mean, I kind of tend to work jokes backwards. I know where the punchline is, and then I think, how do I get there? And so I've got a pretty good gauge after doing it. You know, I used to be on the road for 10, 12 weeks at a time. I wouldn't see the state of Arizona for 3 months sometimes.
A campaign year, do you do politics?
No, I should though.
but you decided that's not what I do?
You mean political humor?
Yeah.
It's real touchy because when you go out and do political humor, you immediately divide the audience in half, unless you equally bash. You know, I can make fun of Obama if I also make fun of Bush. And if you do it, I always try and do it kind of even-handed, where at the end of the show they don't know really where you're coming from politically. Then when you get to be famous, like Jon Stewart or Colbert or those guys, you don't have to be fair because they're playing to their audience.
I promise you right now, in this audience, there's a whole lot of folks who spend little bits and pieces of time watching these kinds of shows on the internet, digital shows. And a whole lot of them want to be in show business making people laugh. Or they have family members that would like to do what you do.
Right.
Tell them how to start.
Well, not to be evasive, but everything's changed. 24 years ago, I just went out and just said, hey, I'm gonna tour the country, and I just went out week after week, and I had I could make one phone call to an agent in L.A. and she could give me 26 weeks worth of work in one phone call.
From the beginning?
From about 6 months in.
Wow.
The word kind of got out that I knew what I was doing, and part of it, I think, I didn't get into this business until I was past 30. So I had a lot of life experiences. I had a lot of business background. I knew how to do the business side of show business.
Okay, listen, right now the business side involves one last thing I'm going to ask you about.
Okay.
The one-man show.
For about the last 10 years, I realized that every fun joke that I really enjoyed, not only writing but performing, was all about relationships. It was all about being married and how to make a better marriage or how to get out of a bad one or whatever. And so I thought, I need to do a show about this. So I've written a one-man show called The Spouse Whisperer. And
as opposed to The Horse Whisperer, or The
Dog Whisperer.
Right?
Right. And,
okay.
And it's a 90-minute show all about relationships, the quirks between men and women, and it's just that human condition.
In 15 seconds, why did you name it that?
I thought it was a real catchy name, and I thought it immediately told people what the show was going to be about.
Yeah.
And
not as funny as the word Cincinnati.
Well, what is?
Mark Cordes, you see him on television, you'll see him in a lot of clubs, wherever it is that you travel, he probably is traveling too, perhaps in the same direction. Or you can tell everybody, wait a minute, I saw him on KTAR.com. That rascal Pat, he knows how to bring people in.